Let's talk a little bit about Atlanta and Utah, John Collins trade teams. They were a luxury tax team. They were over the first apron. They were headed toward the second apron. This is an example of the new collective bargaining agreement. Trade John Collins for Rudy Gay. It's a salary dump.
We are just a few days out before free agency officially begins, and it seems like there's a lot of teams in the NBA that are making as much of a push as possible to prepare for this year's free agency. And right now, we just got a trade that is indicative of that. So before we get to the content, guys, we're giving away $1,000 split between 5 subscribers that turn on our notifications on this channel. We're going to be announcing the giveaway winner in 5 days when free agency starts. All you have to do to enter is just hit the bell next to the subscribe button. And now that we get all that out of the way, cue the intro. The NFL and NBA season are officially over, and I need something to hold me over until at least the NFL season comes back. So I've been playing prize picks for the WNBA and the MLB, and I've been fairly successful. It's a good way to get some extra action on games that I wouldn't really watch otherwise. I post my picks onto my Instagram story daily, and I've been hitting on a decent amount of them. And right now, when you use my promo code microphone, they'll double your deposit up to $100. Mike check 1212. What's going on, everybody? We have covered the Atlanta Hawks extensively on this YouTube channel, primarily about how there was so much turmoil going on in the front office of the Atlanta Hawks that quite literally you saw Travis Schlenk, the previous general manager with the Atlanta Hawks, who, by the way, in my opinion, was doing a fairly good job, step down. Now, just like that, you saw coaches like Lloyd Pierce getting fired as the head coach of the Atlanta Hawks. Nate McMillan would take over for him, but Nate McMillan would be a blessing in disguise because the Atlanta Hawks would make a huge run to the Eastern Conference Finals and quite literally shatter Ben Simmons' confidence. But everything started to go south when the Atlanta Hawks made a huge trade for DeJounte Murray. You see, DeJounte Murray wasn't a player that Travis Schlenk wanted. It was a player that Nick Ressler, the son of Tony Ressler, the owner of the Atlanta Hawks, wanted. Bear in mind that Nick Ressler is 28 years old, meaning this young man gets to straight up play NBA 2K with his father's team. They would trade for DeJounte Murray and would give up 3 first-round picks, a pick swap, and Danilo Gallinari in exchange for DeJounte Murray. And as a result of this, the Hawks would also have to trade Kevin Huerter for a future first-round pick from the Sacramento Kings to get underneath the luxury tax. Throughout the season, things would really only get worse. There were rumors about Nate McMillan wanting to step down, for instance. And then there was this one really awkward situation that painted Trae Young in a bad light, as reports about tensions rising between the two would come out back in December. Following a 13-10 start on the season, Trae Young was receiving treatment on his right shoulder. When Nate McMillan asked Trae Young whether or not he was going to participate in shoot-around, receive treatment during walkthrough, and play in the game against the Denver Nuggets, Trae Young made it clear that he wanted to focus solely on his treatment while missing shoot-around and deciding later in the day whether he would play. This wouldn't be approved by Nate McMillan. Since the face of the Hawks franchise was deciding not to take part in shoot-around, McMillan ultimately presented him with 2 options for that night's game. You could play off the bench or do not show up to the arena. Young responded by saying that he would not be playing against the Nuggets, and the team ruled him out while citing right shoulder soreness. This would result in a very awkward exchange between Trae Young and this reporter.
Private matter again, and it made public, which was unfortunate.
You are a leader of this team, and when you're not there to support your guys.
When you're an outside guy like you are,
things,
a private matter needs to stay private.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg. The crazy part about this is there was some foreshadowing not too long ago. Very shortly after the Atlanta Hawks' incredible run during the 2021 playoffs, Tony Ressler straight up said this via The Athletic. It's complicated, of course, because what we're trying to convince people is we're building something, but let's not kid ourselves. Our job is to run a good business. What we are trying to achieve is literally keeping our best players, as you could imagine, trying to make clear that we're going to have to spend a lot more than we have this season. We fully expect that. that. I'm not sure we're going to be able to keep every single player that we want to keep. Pretty good bet, pretty good assumption we will not. But I do think we have several years that we should be able to build some real stability. If the question is, are we scared of the tax? Are we scared of going into the tax? I'm scared of paying the tax and not being a good team. Yes, that I'm scared of. But if we have to go into the tax to be a great team for a period of time, so be it. This was 2 years ago. Since then, the Atlanta Hawks quite literally have traded Kevin Huerter, Danilo Gallinari, Cam Reddish, Lou Williams is retired, and even Trae Young has been in trade rumors at a particular point, although I don't necessarily think that's the direction this franchise wants to go in. So if you ask me, clearly the Atlanta Hawks are in some big trouble here. There have been some good moments as well. I think they nailed their hiring of Quinn Snyder, and I feel like a full offseason and training camp with Quinn Snyder will make all the difference. But now there's a brand new obstacle for the Atlanta Hawks to have to navigate. And that's the fact that there's a brand new collective bargaining agreement that will punish teams significantly more if they exceed an additional luxury tax threshold. Before, if you exceeded the first apron of the luxury tax, all that would occur is there'd be a hard cap, which will make it significantly more difficult for teams to execute sign-in trades or use the menial biannual exception. Now there's a double apron, and at about $17.5 million above the luxury tax line, you have significantly more restriction. You no longer have the taxpayer mid-level exception. You can't send out cash in trades to buy out second-round picks or deep bench players, meaning the trade where you're sending cash considerations to another team for a player no longer exists. And you can't trade first-round picks that are 7 years out. So all of this is making it significantly more difficult to build a team like what the Warriors had. So some teams have to make decisions. And as a result, you're seeing a huge trade that was made today. There has been a lot of drama surrounding John Collins throughout his tenure with the Atlanta Hawks. And ultimately, we thought it would come to an end in the summer of 2021 when the Atlanta Hawks signed him to a 5-year contract extension, especially considering the fact that this contract aged beautifully. I mean, John Collins is making about $25 million a year, and he has a player option for the 2025 to 2026 season, but at minimum, he's stuck on this contract for the next 2 years as he is pretty much entering his prime. At the same time, John Collins has had a bit of a down year for himself. He went from averaging 21.6 points per game during the 2019 to 2020 season to 17.6 points per game during the season following to 16 points per game in the 2021 to 2022 season, all the way to 13.1 points per game while still playing the same exact minutes this past season, which means the Atlanta Hawks quite literally held the Dogecoin too long, which resulted in them making this trade. According to Adrian Wojnarowski, the Atlanta Hawks are finalizing a trade to send forward/center John Collins to the Utah Jazz for Rudy Gay and a future second-round pick. Atlanta's largely unloading Collins' 3 years, $78 million for some roster-building flexibility and alignment with looming changes to the salary cap. The deal to acquire Collins delivers the Jazz a versatile forward to play alongside all-star Lauri Markkanen and all-rookie center Walker Kessler. The Hawks and Jazz have discussed numerous iterations of this deal for over a year. The Hawks are expected to continue to be in deal-making mode this offseason as ownership has given general manager Landry Fields the okay to move into the luxury tax should it be necessary to improve the roster. And Rudy Gay exercised his $6.4 million option for the 2023 to 2024 season, and that cleared the way for the trade that can't be formalized until July 6th. I know what you guys might be thinking. Why the hell would the Atlanta Hawks donate John Collins to the Utah Jazz? And that's a very legitimate question. The Atlanta Hawks paid John Collins based upon his upside following the 2020 to 2021 season, which in my opinion was the right move. Back then, the landscape of the NBA was significantly different. If you have talent, especially homegrown talent, you do whatever you can to keep it. Now, with this brand new collective bargaining agreement, hell, just a few weeks ago, we were questioning whether or not the Celtics should keep Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Constructing teams is a significantly different ballgame. You no longer can just draft homegrown talent, develop the living hell out of them, and then overpay them to retain them. And you saw this happen with the Golden State Warriors trading Jordan Poole for Chris Paul. They traded him because they didn't feel like he was worth his contract. But prior to the CBA, they had no problem keeping as much homegrown talent as they possibly could. The same could be said here. The Atlanta Hawks saw tremendous upside when they originally paid John Collins the amount that they paid him. But now that he's averaging 13 points per game, he clearly clearly isn't a fit for this team. And that significantly reduces their leverage, which, yeah, ideally 2 years ago, maybe you should have traded John Collins to another team, but we can't play Captain Hindsight as we play armchair general manager in this particular instance. Ideally, Sam Presti wouldn't have traded James Harden to the Houston Rockets. Ideally, the Philadelphia 76ers wouldn't have traded up to the #1 overall pick in the 2017 NBA draft to select Markelle Fultz. They would have selected Jason Tatum. We could play this game over and over and over again. This is not a bad move for the Hawks. It's just an unfortunate move for the Atlanta Hawks. It's kind of like they were backed into a corner with no other decision to make than trade John Collins, because clearly the fit was getting awkward. Now, from the perspective of the Utah Jazz, this is a home run. You're getting a player on a very cheap contract. You're loaded with assets. I can't even explain how loaded this team is with assets. The players that you're investing in are developing remarkably. Lauri Markkanen came out of nowhere. Now you pair him with another player that will complement him remarkably. I mean, between Walker Kessler, Lauri Markkanen, and John Collins, the fact that the Utah Jazz were also competitive last year, there's a lot to be excited about as a Utah Jazz fan. I'd be more excited about this core right now than the core that I had 2 years ago. And once again, it looks like Danny Ainge is establishing himself as a general manager that has the capability of finessing other general managers. This is a remarkable move because I definitely think John Collins' averages are going to go up. I don't know how you go from shooting near 40% from the three-point line to like 30% from the three-point line, which is quite literally what happened from the years of 2019 to 2020 and this past year. But if there's a team that I believe can get the best out of John Collins, it would be the Utah Jazz. I give the Utah Jazz an A+ for this trade. I give the Atlanta Hawks a C+ for this trade, primarily because there's nothing else you could do in this instance. At least they'll have some flexibility in free agency to potentially pursue other players that make sense around Trae Young and DeJounte Murray, because clearly John Collins wasn't one of those players this past season, so they didn't really have a choice in this instance. This is just the beginning. We saw Jordan Poole get traded. Now we're seeing John Collins get traded. Get used to this. A lot of young players on rookie max contracts or rookie extensions that teams don't view as a worth it investment anymore are probably going to get traded very, very soon. And when they do, we're going to be covering it on this channel. Speaking of which, did you catch our video on Jordan Poole getting traded for Chris Paul? I'll leave it in the end screen for you guys to check out if you missed it, or maybe Zion Williamson's latest crazy baby mama drama. I'll leave both of those in the end screen for you. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike. I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.